First of all, I'd say that 2024 is a special year. Like 20 years ago when we graduated, and a few years later when I was working in startups, I heard this Peter Thiel quote. Oh, you know what? Like even in consumer, you can do new things because some of the things that you said, like, the underlying technology has changed. A lot of underlying science is creating breakthroughs. Who would have thought that, there would be a Nobel Prize for AI chemistry, right? Which goes to a machine learning. Usually, when you and I, like, just go on with like general day-to-day life, we are only talking about things that are in business, technology, in our
Hello,
day-to-day
everyone.
operations, right?
Welcome to Pragmatic AI, a podcast where we dive deep into the real stories from the AI trenches, speaking with luminaries from the global AI ecosystem. You might be wondering why another podcast with a focus on AI. Our goal is simple to bring authenticity to the AI conversations and cut through the hype. Each episode will feature industry leaders from founders, VCs, to AI leaders and academics who have been building AI systems and ventures for 10, 15, 20, and many more years. These are people who have lived through multiple AI hype cycles and have better scars to show. I am your host, Anuj Gupta. I'm a seasoned AI advisor and mentor. With 20 years of experience in AI, I have transformed startups and Fortune 50 companies, driving billion-dollar outcomes, including funding rounds, acquisitions, and IPO. Recently, one of the AI systems that I mentored was demoed to Sam Altman and Vinod Khosla. I have also co-authored a landmark book in AI, globally influencing both academia and the tech leadership. Join us as we explore the pragmatic side of AI, where the real stories are
Hi,
told.
welcome to today's episode. Today we have Rajan. Rajan is a pragmatic builder of AI companies that matter. He is the managing director of Upekkha, backing 150 plus ambitious global Indian founders, bridging Silicon Valley and India's engineering strength. Prior to Upekkha, Rajan founded a computer vision startup, worked as an engineer in MZ, which was acquired, and was product leader during QuickBooks Online expansion. He hosts Pivotal Clarity, a leading tech podcast focused on real world AI deployments. His unique lens combines technical depth from early computer vision systems to building global products with practical market insights into AI's business impact. Rajan guides founders through zero to one journey of building profitable, enduring AI companies. If you are building an AI company,
Hey
you
Rajan,
must
how are you
DM
doing?
Rajan.
Hey, Anuj. Good man. All good.
What what have you been up to these days?
Well, like like you and I, we keep track of what is going on in the world of AI. I work with startups and keep track of that. I'm on a bit of a travel right now for Diwali back in India, uh, and trying to figure out like what is happening in India and keeping track of what's happening in AI in the Bay Area in SF.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking out time and doing this. It's absolutely a pleasure to have you. You and I go a long way. For the audience, both I and Rajan come from same college. Rajan was part of the first batch of Triple IT Hyderabad.
I was part of the second batch. I graduated in 2003.
Yeah, and I did, for folks who don't know me, I did my master's from 2006 onward. So while we never met on the campus, uh, but we met much later. But since then, we have both had a lot of interesting conversations, and I thought we should definitely bring Rajan onto the podcast and build a deeper and a better understanding of AI from his point of view. Rajan is known in the ecosystem for a lot of first principles thinking, for a lot of bringing a lot of clarity, simplifying things, uh, breaking them down to the basics, and which is why it's always a pleasure to talk to Rajan any given day. Thank you so much, Rajan.
Yeah, great to be here, and thank you for having me here. I know we did not overlap, but we have a lot of common professor, and then any triple IT folks will always start with talking about Professor Jawhar and and the courses that we learn on neural networks and fuzzy logic and things like that. So we have a lot of commonality. We were not in the same years.
Absolutely, Rajan. So, Rajan, the world since the chat GPT came in, and it's almost maybe another week, it will be 2 years, right? The world is changing fast, right? Over the last weekend, we saw Optimus Prime, we saw SpaceX catching its boosters, right? It's almost some aspects of engineering which nobody ever thought, right? We've seen AI becoming a household word. Just yesterday, there was a conversation between the chairman of Reliance and the chairman of NVIDIA. Quantum may be another 2 to 3 years away. As an investor, as an operator whose work is about predicting future, what do you think all of this means for businesses, government and countries, and maybe even for
I mean,
mankind?
first of all, I'd say that 2024 is a special year. Like 20 years ago when we graduated, and a few years later when I was working in startups, I heard this Peter Thiel quote where he said, "We wanted flying cars, and what we got was just 140 characters," and he was referring to Twitter. But then we do have autonomous cars and flying cars. There's some YC startups apparently are working on it. So 20 years ago, it felt like the progress in science had slowed down. And in the early 1920s, 30s, 40s, like tremendous amount of progress has happened. So what I would say in 2024, what has happened is that usually when you and I just go on with like general day-to-day life, we are only talking about things that are in business, technology, in our day-to-day operations, right? But I think this year there are some profound scientific changes that are happening, that are coming up. So what I would say from my perspective, answering your question is that I mean, as an investor, any great investor that I followed, they don't predict the future, right? So what they do instead is not get caught in the mental model that they had the last 15 years. Like, for instance, one thing I can tell you is like 15 years ago, I built a consumer startup. And then since 2011, I've been only looking at P2P. But 2023, 2024, I'm starting to look back at consumer and then say, oh, you know what? Like, even in consumer, you can do new things because some of the things that you said, like, the underlying technology has changed. A lot of underlying science is creating breakthroughs. Who would have thought that, there would be a Nobel Prize for AI chemistry, right? Which goes to a machine learning background. Predict a lot. What I'd rather do is that I discard my mental model of how I used to think about from, let's say, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years ago. And all the great investors, what I see is that they evaluate every idea for its own merit. They don't do pattern matching. There's a common myth that says that investors are looking for pattern matching. They are saying, are you e-commerce of this or you're Uber of that and things like that. Now, maybe that's how when people get into the field they get started out. But the school of hard knocks teaches all the investors is that every time you do this, where you actually just copy a narrative, where you copy some Uber of this or that, then it doesn't work out. And those people who do think from a first principles for each idea, in the long term, in the 10-15 year horizon, they emerge winners. And those who have thought about things are saying, oh, this is the Flipkart of that, and then just did pattern matching. What happens with them is that in the short term, they look very genius like, and then in the long term, things tank on them. So I would actually say just think about every idea from its own merit perspective. So if you're thinking that, or you want to build a consumer idea, or you want to build something for the India market, or you want to build something for the China market, everything changes, right? So not trying to predict, but just breaking it down to basics and see as of today what is happening, and then based on this, like what can this potentially become, right? That's how I think about evaluating. No prediction. Prediction always has not worked.
Interesting, interesting. I will come to this VC aspect and how do you kind of keep updating your mental models later. Maybe let's keep the first half on the AI side of things. Uh,
when we started Rajan, right, internet played a critical role, right? And internet became this knowledge repository where you can go and find absolutely anything, right? And it made tremendous as to anybody who wanted any kind of a knowledge, there is always a teacher available kind of a setting that happened, right? With AI and with this generative AI, do you think we're gonna get to a point whereby a large part of information that is there on the net will actually be machine generated, which means it might not be trustworthy, which means our default mode on internet from trusting it will actually go to not trusting it.
Yeah, I
And
think it's a fascinating question. So first, I would say that, even the information on internet is not trustworthy, right? And one of the things that I found fascinating, and I don't know whether most people think about it this way, is I actually think about all this neural network, transformer-based architecture, etc., right? They are basically compression engines. They are compression engines that they have taken the entire internet and compressed it and made it really, really easy to access, right? So in some sense, it is very different from search engine, but some sense it's very similar to search engine. It's taking the entire internet and then saying, I'm going to sort of compress it into weights, and then you can ask anything, and then I will tell you, right? And if you look at the internet era, there again, trust played a critical role. People thought that, internet is going to bring the world closer, and it'll make, like, information superhighway and things like that, which it did, which allowed it did allow people across countries to talk to each other and collaborate better, and, like, information that was not available, let's say, about Poland to India and vice versa, was like made available. But the element of trust that you say, that's a part of the question, that actually, with the internet, the trust needed to be that much more higher, right? I mean, the friction of sending the information to one place to another became very easy. I know in Tannenbaum we do this one exercise where we say, if you have to take information from one place to another, you can use a bullock cart, you can use a Cisco router, and then which is faster, which is cheaper. So illustrating the point that, technology has actually made it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But that is just the cost part of it. The trust part of it on internet was still very, very high. I mean, it required to be very, very high for transactions to happen, or somebody else had to underwrite. So I actually think, with respect to all the AI shift that we are talking about, the role of human will be that much more critical. If you just a simple example, right? You go on a website, and I have this conversation with a lot of SaaS founders. You go on a website, you read some text there, and then sometimes it is in feature language, sometimes it is in benefit language. And then once you frame it in benefit language, people understand, oh, you're selling automation of software, or you're doing some automation of accounting. But people will not trust it unless you put a logo there, unless you put a testimonial there, right? And that testimonial and that logo is what turns that website into more trustable compared to a Nigerian website that you would see, which is a scam, right? So the human face, and this is well known for anybody who designs website, right? The human face on a website, not the graphics, but the human face on the website is what is working on the psychological level. It is bringing that element of trust, because you can see a real person. So the more and more people are going to feel that, the text that is coming out to them is not generated from a human, there would be need for much higher trust. So it happened in the world of internet. It is definitely going to be in the world of AI, that the role of human in generating that trust that will lead to transaction or business is going to continue to be high. And that's why I am not worried about AI taking away jobs from humans. In element, we will do a lot of automation, but we will still need a human to actually trust and do a transaction.
interesting. And you talk of this compression engine analogy, right? And the first thing that came to my mind is all compressions are lossy, right?
Yeah,
And that's the kind of point that you're making. In order to fill up for that loss, you need some other element to come in from outside the system, right? And take it up
that's
in.
a great way to think about it. That's a great way to think about it. I didn't think about it as a lossy from a trust perspective. You can talk about lossy from an information perspective as well.
Yeah.
But see, fundamentally, human, they do a transaction when a human is involved,
Hmm.
right? I mean, of course, there might be some low value transactions that are getting automated, but every time a big disaster happens, people are like, oh, shoot, We should have put a human in this place because it did not go through a human verification or a check, right? So anything which is going to be like significant in terms of like impact value, it is going to have a human in place to actually do the verification. So trust plays a big role in any like transaction. So if the cost of that going wrong is low means, then you will kind of automate, maybe let AI or some automation software like take the call on that. But like for instance, like in healthcare, or for instance in large transactions on like moving of money, something which impacts a whole lot of people, right? Policies and things like that. We'll always put a human there for making sure that the trust part is taken care of.
Very interesting, very interesting. And I myself, so I actually ended up creating a framework when to apply AI to problem. And one of the key points I make over there is evaluate the cost of a mistake. If a cost of a mistake is high, it might not be the right problem for AI today. It may be 5 years down the line, we don't know, but at least today it might not be a right way. That's a great way to think of. Uh, in terms of AI itself, right? The last 2 years have seen massive improvements. I mean, from being a very niche word, it has gone on to become a now a household word. While it is impacting every area, it's gonna have impact at every place. How do you think, in general, is society ready for AI? One of the things that has changed, I feel, is that while I agree to the point that you earlier made that the science was making slower progress earlier, but today the time from science labs to industry research labs to industry, that has shortened. So anything that changes in science 3 days ago starts to make way within a couple of hours in the industry as well, which means the adoption is going to be higher. Do you think, in general, mankind is ready for at least some of the how AI is being sold to the big tech, which means it's going to revolutionize a lot of stuff. It will also have a lot of repercussions, right? There could be upheavals in societies, the very social fabric. Do you think we are ready for this? And if not, governments and others are going to put a knee-jerk reaction to that?
Broad question, Anuj. Let's kind of break it down, right? So one, like start with the progress of science. I would actually flip it. When I was thinking about it 20 years ago, I was thinking, why aren't we having the same kind of breakneck progress in science and technology the way it was happening in 1920s or 40s, right? And when you and I graduated, like the whole field of AI was in its like one of its deepest winters, right? And not just AI, but like or machine learning or computer science, but like broader science. Now I feel like this decade is where it is kind of maybe mirroring like what happened like 80 100 years ago, and maybe it is the decades of the 20s where high amount of science progress happens. I don't know, that may be the case. I would actually say that look, in the 1920s people did go through such kind breakneck speed, and it had it was intertwined with the politics back then. It was intertwined with how society was changing, how we were going from dictators, monarchs to like democracies and things like that. So a lot of change was happening, and then people did okay, right? I mean, it did have a couple of world wars, and then people realized that I mean, as humans, if we want to survive, then they can't be fighting with each other, and then things settle down. So I don't think we will have problem in adjusting with that. I think if you look at it from a long enough time scale, in the early 1900s, people were able to. I mean, we as society, human society, was able to actually deal with it. So I don't think the pace is going to be that much of a problem for humankind to actually deal with it. Now, as individuals, the answer may be different, right? So for you and I, we were living in a pace where it was very slow, and suddenly it is very fast. And the way I describe the fast is that every 6 months in now looks like every 5 years of progress. right? And if you read the latest Daniel Amura's CEO of Anthropic Species, he says that um, the 50 100 years of progress in biology and chemistry and basic science is going to happen in 5 10 years, right? Because that's how the pace is changing. Now when what happens is that, like, most people are not realizing it, and this is something that I've learned from working with startups, is that when you're inside the exponential curve, you don't feel it, right? Only when you come out of the exponential curve, then you kind of have a outsider observation of this. You are like, wow, like, this is happening at so much speed. So it is. So anybody who's like 10-year-old today, or anybody who's like, 15-year-old today, they are going to say, I don't understand what are you talking about. But anybody who's like 40-year-old today, they've dealt with such a slow pace. And then suddenly for them, it's like, oh man, like, this is so steep, right? And they may feel the pressure. But I think, broadly, we will be able to adjust. And so therefore, I'm very, very excited. It may sound like a tangent, but I'm very excited about what the 15-year-olds today will do with what is happening. Right? Because for them, a lot of this is going to be very, very native, as opposed to someone who's like a 40-year-old for whom, like, they dealt with a slow progress and then they're dealing with, an exponential progress right now. How would governments deal with this? How would like, broader society deal with it? I love this one phrase from the founder of Wired.
Mm.
Right. So he said that any technology which a human experiences after 35 years, to him, it looks like magic and he cannot deal with it. Any technology less than 35, you find it very, very natural. And that's why, like, our parents cannot deal with WhatsApp, right? Kids who are like 15 years old don't know the old dialer phones and things like that, right? How would society deal with AI specifically? I think any technology, if you take, it cannot be controlled by a border, right? I mean, there are some countries that deal with like, some technology is better because they're able to bring in talent and resources and things like that. But if you see, internet could
Sure.
not be regulated by, like, governments. Or let me actually rephrase it. It cannot be regulated by democracies. If you're a dictator, maybe you can. Right? China did regulate internet.
Yeah.
Right? Any technology cannot be regulated by democracies.
Mm.
So most people thinking that they will be able to take AI and then say that, this is how I'm going to define it in this country and this is how it will work here. They not work in internet, right? So I actually feel that societies which are democratic will find it hard to regulate AI in a way that, it helps them. So, but the countries like, China or South Korea, or like, sorry, the North Korea, who are like, not democracies, they'll be able to sort of put a lot of clamps. But then they've done that in the internet. So regulation is going to be like a very interesting topic. I always go back to like, basic simple economic principles on this. All the countries will have to work on what is their comparative advantage, what is their unique advantage. I wrote a piece on that saying every country needs an AI strategy last year. And I essentially say this, that you should not say that, oh, we should also go ahead and bring a cluster of NVIDIA GPUs, right? When that is not your strength. If your strength is actually creating models,
Yeah.
right? Building foundation models, then you should do it. Of course, for some sovereign reasons, you may want to build, like, your own models, but you have to actually evaluate saying what is going to be your unique strength, how is the value chain changing, and in this value chain, where is my position the best, and what can I maximize there. So I know, like, your question was a broad question. I went broad. I went into broad directions to address that.
No, it was great. I mean, just continuing on this head, right? I mean, back in our days when we were doing our undergrads and the masters and stuff, we had courses where we would be asked to write research papers, take up problems, maybe open-ended problems, solve them. Many a times there is no point of these problems than those solutions. I'm sure all of those solutions were written on paper and ended up in dustbins, right? But the whole point was not the problem or the solution itself, but the grind with which we went through in the it is the process part of it. Now, one of the things when I look at ChatGPT, where it has taken and these whole LLMs is creating a V0 is fairly easy.
I'm not saying you can write a extremely polished, super great essay. No, but getting to that V0 is fairly easy. And once you have a V0, then going from 0 to 1 is hard, we all know. Then, but going from the first version to the second and second to the third is fairly easy part of it. But what is the impact it's going to have on the human brain where it is not going through that grind? And we all know neurons tend to connect each other, they grow, they stretch, all of that happens. So while the artificial part grows, don't you think the natural is actually going to come down? Because a lot of this rigor that is needed on the ground, especially when you're young, that will kind of go away because there are chat GPTs of the world.
Yeah, it's a great question you ask. I do think it is going to have impact. The natural intelligence may not be utilized as much, and then unless you think about the way we say is that we I would rephrase what you said, right? Which is that the way people understand things is because a new neurons get formed when you are solving a particular problem,
Yes.
right? And that the V0 problem that had to be solved by the human brain is getting taken away because somebody else is doing it cheaply. That means that those neurons are not formed. So therefore, the natural intelligence may go down. I mean, I agree with that. But if you take parallel for practically anything else, right? I'm just making like some like very trivial example, right? So people used to say that, when you good food comes from when you actually use the old granite based hand driven grinder to actually create wheat flour, right? But
Right.
then like when automation came in, the taste changed, right? And people were not doing that labor, and therefore the taste did not come. But then the job was getting done, and somehow we, as a group of humans in society, we kind of evolved and adapted to that. So I feel my own take on this is that if it is, see, the hard part or the value part is eventually going to be determined by humans,
Hmm. Okay.
right? So the final value of doing something is going to be determined by humans. If that value changes, right, then that's when the task gets dropped, right? We can make all the case of saying that we need handmade shoes, and that is artisans, or we need to actually ensure that cobblers are having a livelihood. But then, like when it is more sturdy, it is more durable, and it looks more cooler when a factory produced shoe is out there, then of course the value has shifted there,
Hmm.
right? So wherever the value shift is where the society actually ensures that that gets adopted, and that's what is like taking the top position. So in what I'm trying to say is that in this particular question, I feel that there might be specific areas where, despite we know that this can be done by others, by a machine, but like having a human do it is what will be relevant. Like maybe some esoteric subject in which, like doing that thought process from a human is necessary. Let's say, like coming up with another transformer like paper, right? Where we have to actually sit down and then say, oh, we need to do some fundamental work. But in most cases where that automation is going to be more valuable,
Hmm.
right? Just because it was done a certain way before,
Yeah.
it'll like it'll not stick around. So I actually don't see a challenge with the framing that you're saying. I feel that uh, as long as we look at that value lens,
Hmm.
right, the problem gets taken care of.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, the analogy that I have seen at least is that when I look at the younger generation, right, while they're absolutely great, fabulous, faster, smarter, right, I often feel that I've grown old enough and I'm at risk. But one thing that I kind of find a differentiation is the attention spans. People of our generation can still sit for 2 hours, 3 hours without a phone and stuff like that. And I mean, there's something I've observed in my own teams that I've built, and Actually, I remember there was one particular gentleman I had to let go. Absolutely fabulous coder, one of the best that I've kind of met. But he had this impulsive habit of checking his phone after every 5 minutes. He has to go on Insta after every 5 minutes. I'm like, how can you work, right? Unless you are a sustained. But that's the kind of analogy I was kind of had in mind. That the whole thinking process.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. See, then that is why we also see the rise of meditation camps and like Vipassana and things like that. Like for instance, if that is too much of a problem, then that is going to lead to mental health. And if that leads to mental health, then you actually go to detox camps where you're like, look, I want to spend 10 days where I have to get rid of my bad habit of wanting to look at like a phone or a screen after every 5 minutes. And that again, I would bring it back to value. I mean, if you are so obsessive with this and that is creating negative value for it,
Hmm.
then it becomes like a bad substance in the society. Then we will realize the society saying, oh, you know what, we need to regulate this or we need to find a solution to this. We realize that this becomes a problem. So I'm basically what I'm saying is that the natural intelligence that gets developed when you're trying to do the V0 of a problem.
Yeah.
Now, wherever it ends up having negative value. Like, I mean, another simple example is you learning multiplication tables, right? Multiplication tables, if you learn multiplication tables and you learn the basic arithmetic, then, you know, those kind of things form in your brain. But then there are so many people who don't do this, don't need to do it, and then they use calculator. Right?
Yes.
You ask my dad, he'd be like, look, that is not kosher at all. You have to learn multiplication tables, then only you'll be good at arithmetic. But so many people find it easy for them to live their life without having to learn multiplication table. So that's where I think it will come to that in many cases in research, people will be like, oh, this is like learning multiplication table. People who have come from the olden philosophy, they'll be like, look, you have to do this the hard way. But others will be like, no, 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 I'm going to go to LLM and then ask me to draft me a V0.
I think the only point I was trying to explore here is no, absolutely using tools and all, I'm all in for it, but you should know how to do it when it is not there.
Yeah.
So I consciously make a choice whenever I'm writing a critical article, I don't use GPT. The first version, I do absolutely my own thinking because it helps to bring that clarity. We all know what writing can do, right? I mean, brain is full of thousands of thoughts. Writing brings a
Is
lot
thinking.
to it, right?
Writing is thinking, yeah, in paper.
Once that we zero it out, of course, my grammar isn't perfect, my spellings aren't perfect. That is, or the formulation can be slightly more better and stuff like that. That is where GPT comes handy. Is how I have developed my own thing, which is kind of opposite to what I see with a lot of people. The point I was just trying to explore is it going to be the case that one set is going to have an advantage, especially the former, over the other because masses will be about the other. Massive will be about using GPTs of the world for V0, which is where if you really want something great, if like hand woven products will become highly expensive, niche, as opposed to industry made ones. I mean, that's the analogy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I agree with that. It's just I'm saying that the hand woven product will have to be sold in five-star hotel, or it has to be like, you know, in very niche places where, like, you know, it is really, really appreciated. Like, you know, in the mass market, that hand woven product will get beaten up.
Yes.
But in fashion markets,
Yeah.
right, hand woven product will have premium over other. And that stratification is what happens,
Interesting.
right? So more it becomes more niche, but it goes to more high value zones.
So got it. Maybe shifting gears from impact of AI from man to mankind to a more pragmatic topic. You have spent lots and lots of time in SaaS. And you're also one of those who started doing AI very, very early in your journey. What are the non-trivial ways in which AI has impacted SaaS?
Yeah. So let's talk about, like, you know, how did SaaS happen? How did SaaS come from enterprise, you know, somewhere around 2003, 2005 timeframe? Enterprise SaaS, enterprise software, right, was is more like, you know, how you would purchase an apartment. And SaaS is like, you know, how you would rent it out, right? So there's a difference in cost. And the way it was sold, the software was sold before is someone would take a suitcase, go meet people, maybe play golf, and go knock on door to door. And that's how enterprise software was purchased, because it was a high ticket item. People had to do POCs to know that this is working. The CD that they are getting sold is actually going to work. And then after that, then adoption would happen. And then once every 1 or 2 years, there will be some update that will go on. Now, this was the days when software was shipped in CDs. But as internet became more powerful, it was easy to deliver applications over the internet. The delivery of the software did not require physical distribution. It could be done over the internet. And also the rise of Google and the rise a little bit of the social networks and things like that made it easy for people to ask around, find a problem to solution. So if I had an issue of how to actually keep track of all my contacts, I could go to Google and then find out, right? This was not the case before. Because of these two things, what had happened is that how software gets purchased changed, right? It went from selling to assisted buying, right? It's like how you would purchase a jeans in a Levi's jeans store. There you're nobody comes to your home and then knocks on your door and then says would you like to purchase a jeans, right? They create these showrooms. They create ads on TVs and billboards with stars, and then they create a desire in you to say, okay, come check this out in the showroom. You go there, you have a trial experience, and if you love the trial experience, you are like, okay, I'm going to buy. So the sales guy there is just doing checkout for you. He's not actually hard selling to you. So that's the shift that had happened from enterprise software to SaaS. And then it ballooned into this fantastic industry. Investors loved it. It became easy for people to do smaller ticket items and deliver software. It became easy for people outside of Silicon Valley to build software and then distribute software. All of these externalities happened because of this one fundamental shift on how buying process changed. So whenever I look at whether it is startups or whether it is a broader tennis, I ask this question is, how do they buy and how is it changing?
Hmm.
Right? So what is happening with AI is how people buy is changing. One big thing, very, very early onset is in the last 15 years, there was a headcount budget, there was a software budget. People
Hmm.
would think about headcount separately, software separately. For
Sure.
the first time, it is getting conflating. People are combining these two. People are not thinking about these as two different budgets. It
Hmm.
was almost sacrosanct not to touch one with the other before.
Yeah.
Right? If you in the CFO's office, they will just treat these as two different categories. Now it is starting to merge. I think that is the biggest shift that is happening, which is going to change the way SaaS gets used, right? So SaaS in its own form may not be there, right?
Hmm.
SaaS is about that recurring nature. It is about I'm paying a monthly rental. I
Yeah.
mean, if it is still a big guy, the guy will pay monthly rental annually, but still the difference is between owning a house and then renting a house. But
Yeah.
now it is almost like you are delivered an outcome,
Hmm.
right? So I would, if I were to just extend that analogy a little bit more, I mean, all analogies break, and it might break here as well. All metaphors break, right? They're all leaky abstractions. So it's almost like you're on an Airbnb, right? You are not renting also for the time that you are using it. You are paying for it.
Hmm.
So that is the shift that is coming up, and that changes pricing model. That means that those people who were good at, let's say, just build business, build real estate and sell, their business model will be served by somebody who runs an Airbnb,
Yeah. Yeah. This is a great analogy.
right?
Yeah.
So that's how the change is happening in terms of it's moving to usage, just in time usage, which means you're not having a contract for paying recurring way,
Hmm.
which means you don't own, but then people don't care. They only care about the experience, right? So the players that will get involved, see, there is still building going to be built. There are still some amount of recurring, bills have to be paid. But then that will get abstracted by somebody else and then say, hey, I will take care of all of that. Or I will work with people who have all of that. Now what you do is that, you just pay me for the outcome that is delivered. This is the pricing model shift that is happening when a company like Intercom says that, you don't pay me on per seat basis, per user basis, for the support software that you're using. You just pay me on the basis of how much support was resolved, right? That shift in outcome-based pricing is what is going to happen, right? So I mean, it's already underway. So that is how I think, fundamentally gets disrupted. And the question to always ask is, how is the buying process changing?
Got it. Okay, this makes a lot of sense. Great insight. Any other things that you have seen, SaaS, AI?
See, okay, I mean, here is something that is happening, right? So we have perhaps, like, close to 2 years, like you said earlier, that, in a few weeks will come to the 2-year anniversary. When these things change, when how buying changes, the next question that I end up asking is, how is the go-to-market changing?
Yes.
Right? And go-to-market may sound like a very complicated word. Let me try and see if I can simplify it. Go-to-market is like going and fishing. Right? It's like, let's say you're interested in going fishing. I mean, like, you're fishing customers, right? Your customers are fish. You're saying, okay, how do I get those customers? So go-to-market is about saying, given your experience, given where you stay, given the resources that you can access, what are the choices that you're going to make to fish? Now, if you're a first-time person, you've never done fishing in your life, like, you'll probably just get a small fishing rod and then get a bucket and then go to a corner of a sea or a river and then sit there and then, do fishing, right? You'll catch a little bit of fish, and then, that may be good enough for you. But if you are someone who has more appetite or you have more experience, then you will charter a boat. You'll hire someone who's experienced. They'll go 10 kilometers into the sea or wherever, like, the fish you think are available. And then, put out chum and then wait. Maybe it'll take 2-3 days for you to catch one big fish. Right. But for someone who's just getting started, you'll catch small fish, and hopefully that also satisfies you.
Sure.
Right. So what choice are you making? Are you making a near the shore strategy? Or are you making in the sea strategy, in the sea's choice to fish? Right. Now, when the buying pattern changes, when where these fishes are going to hang out, where this buying pattern changes, then you'll have to adjust your go-to-market. And this is where it is very fascinating for me. See, the SaaS shift, what it had enabled was it allowed somebody sitting in Alvarpet in Chennai to build a software and could sell the same way as somebody who's sitting in Alabama. Because no more did the buyer care about that, they met you face to face. And if they saw the experience was good enough on a website, then, as long as it looked very trustworthy, they saw good testimonials, logos, and things like that, they said, okay, I'm going to purchase. I'm going to sort of use this particular software, right? Now, if people are thinking about where the outcomes that they care about are going to be there, then they will actually shift to that. And today, that outcome that is there, even though it is 2 years, it is still not very clear where there is going to be like solid unit economics. While it is fantastic to say that, there is LLM, there is Anthropic, there is OpenAI, but still try to make a unit economics work for an application, it is still very, very hard, right? So that is going to be one critical question. But then within that, you have to add this go-to-market cost. And when you add this go-to-market cost, then how are things going to change? So there are 2 or 3 different patterns that I'm seeing are emerging. One is that with respect to all AI products, they are working because of what I call as magical UX. Same problem, right? But it is done 100x better. And then, there is a jaw drop that happens, and you're like, wow. And then people are like leaving their old tools and they're going to these new tools. So there are people who are building, what I like to say is the product-led growth. I know that term is abused a lot, but in product-led growth, what is happening is people are saying, okay, this particular problem, let's say an editing tool, photo editing tool, like photo editing tool, there are like online tools available, there is Adobe Photoshop available. But when you use it in Midjourney or you use it in this latest tools that are out there, it is so amazing, right? What used to take me 100 steps there is taking me 2 steps, and then jaw drop. People are shifting over that. Now, this jaw drop, this magical UX is what getting the first initial adopters. They are telling others, leading to word of mouth. And that is amplified by influencer marketing. These type of products are coming up. these products are getting to maybe 1 million, 2 million in 12 months. I
Yeah.
saw someone builder who built his first startup for about 5 to 6 million in 3 years, and then he bought another product and then built added AI, and then did again same magical UX, and then that led to about another $1 million in revenue in 6 months. So there is this product-led growth, where product-led growth means that your product has to be so amazing that it leads to word of mouth,
Yeah.
amplified by a few other things that you would do.
Yeah.
So that go to market is working. It doesn't matter whether you're in Cambodia, whether you are in Silicon Valley, and if you're able to actually build a product like that, that is working. Whether you have funding or no funding doesn't matter. It has to be that magical UX, word of mouth, leading to crazy growth. The other thing that I'm seeing is that, see, one thing that people have realized is whenever there is these tech shifts happen, you have to ensure that you are always on top of it. And the incumbents have understood this better in the last 20 years. In the time of internet, incumbents did not understand. The SGI is not there anymore, right? SGI did not see all the internet shift that came around. I mean, Microsoft did, but SGI did not. Many people in today's day and age, they would not even know SGI, but it was an amazing incumbent back in 30 years ago, right? Now incumbents have all caught up. So if there is a tech shift, they are just willing to go and throw a lot of money onto that. And therefore, what is happening is there is this huge FOMO that is happening. And another go-to-market that is working is that all the new AI enterprise type builders, what they're going is they're going to the board is going to the CEO, CEO is going to the middle manager, and they're saying, man, we have to have an enterprise strategy. Let us start working on it.
Yes.
And that is expensive though. It is the old 20 years old enterprise sales, go to the golf course, close deals type of motion that still works for that high value projects, right? So that is another go to market that is working. I mean, the companies like Glean, Writer, there are like many other companies that are in Silicon Valley, many VC funded companies. They know that this model works for very high ticket enterprise sales, and that is again something that is working. Now the third thing that I would say that is also where an edge for Indian founders could come is the whole idea of a tool and a service is merging, which is also the reason why the headcount cost and that the tool cost is merging. Because it is a new area, you are interested in it, but you don't know what is going to happen there. So people are taking a very exploratory approach, are saying, okay, let's go build something. Now, whatever that build something could mean, right? But I want to work with people that I've already trusted, who can help me build that, which is what you're seeing in the Accentures of the world and the TCS of the world. See, every time there is a tech shift, people predict that the IT services companies will die, and then something funny happens where they grow more.
Yeah.
So you see this, crazy uptick in Accenture. Now, it could be the case that Accenture is so big. A founder friend told me Accenture is so big that, either they could be inflating or like a huge flip might be happening because of AI. And it is quite possible both are simultaneously true. Right? But it is happening with Accenture, it's happening with TCS, it is happening with smaller IT services companies that I have been recently talking to. So to me, that tells that this is not just a recategorization of their services revenue into an AI services revenue, right? So what is happening is these enterprises are saying that we need to figure this out. We need a trusted partner, and they have helped them with building mainframe and helping with the cloud transformation and the digital transformation. They're saying, okay, help us with AI and tell us what will happen with LLM. So I'm also seeing this huge uptick on AI services revenue.
Got it.
Right, so these are these are the three different type of broadly go to market that I would say is kind of working in the market. So any founder that I work with, I tell them that either you raise a lot of money, be in Valley, and then write the enterprise go to market approach, and then of course you have to make sure that the product is good enough. Should the user experience has to be good enough, or you take this product led approach where you iteratively think about building a new tool for an existing problem, but ensure that the magical UX is there. It is not just 2x, 3x UX. It has to be jaw drop has to happen, leads to word of mouth, and then it is amplified by influencer marketing. And that can lead to very fast growth in very little amount of time. Now, because of all of this change, what is happening is people are not buying tools which look very traditional. So that is a decline that we are seeing, and that is the decline in the SaaS revenue that is happening. Every now and then I hear some people saying, "Oh, we missed our quota, we missed our quarter." Like people are not buying SaaS tools. This is because that everybody is excited about what is happening in AI. And moreover, like, we are recovering from a post-COVID shock, right? I mean, in COVID, people bought so many tools. Everybody thought everything will be digital. So much investment went into SaaS. And then that was getting deflationed out.
Yeah.
Thanks to AI, there is excitement in all users. They are like, I don't know what magic I will experience today. So I am willing to keep budget. I'm willing to sort of try things out, and that leads to both consumer and the enterprise. And therefore, like, lot of activities is happening there. So go to markets are changing, and when the buying pattern change, when the go to market change, you have to leverage both to build
Yeah.
large businesses.
Interesting. I'd like to double click on two of the points, right? So, see, SaaS, the biggest thing that worked in its favor was the margin, right? And at the heart of it was, like you said, one, you can build from anywhere and sell anywhere, right? So you can build in markets where it is economically more viable and then sell it to the markets, right? And play the forex exchange game over there, right? But what also worked for SaaS as opposed to on-premise, build once, sell multiple times, right? Creating a copy of a software is just a one-line statement. So that led to this 80-85% margin gain, right? Some of the largest margins in any business ever heard of. With AI, don't you think this is going to reverse? And I'll take so this is
Absolutely. 100% agree with you. I think, a lot of people are recognizing this. In fact, we wrote a report as Upekkha, we wrote a report released in March, and the report was titled as Software and Services is the next big opportunity. Many people call this as service as a software, outcome as a service. So the what it should be called is still not settled. But this aspect of that you could build once and then you can scale more is what led to a huge gross margin in SaaS, and like that was what was different from services. It's a great point. What I like to sort of frame this as is, I was having this conversation about services versus product. I've been having this conversation for 15 years, and now, I mean, I changed my view on services and product like in 2017, but now even more, right? Even more conviction on saying that there's no difference between services and product. And a simple definition of services for me is that if you had to scale the business and the scaling of the business involved headcount, that means your gross margins can't be high,
mm,
right? But now with AI, right, whether you're building a custom tool or not building a custom tool, the scaling of the business that you're about to bring in, that does not require same headcount. And I've been talking to multiple services companies, right, which are like new services company startups who are actually doing this. Now, whether Accenture and TCS are doing it or not, I don't know. But you're bang on about the point of saying that the gross margins with AI services going to be as good as, let's say, what was a technology or a platform company before. Maybe not as high as 80%, but north of 60% sure.
sure. But I had a more deeper point here, right? So if you look at how AI systems evolve, right, you start with a simple V0. V0 is often to test the market, understand what works, what does work. Once you have the traction, you start improving your model, you keep on going up, right? And we have actually written an article. How does that capability, if I were to draw the capability on y-axis and time on x-axis, then what does that graph look like for traditional software versus AI software? And that graph is drastically very different, right? But at some point of time, say, imagine your systems are operating at 93% accuracy or whatever. Now, you're not going to have a single model that's going to serve all the customers. At least today, we are not closer to anywhere, right? Now, the customers are used to deterministic softwares which need to have 100% accuracy. Now, eventually, whether you like it or not, no matter what happens, and I've seen this play out in my own journey for last 10 years, in order to push the accuracies up, what you end up doing is you take the data of that particular customer and you overtune or overfit, as it is called in machine learning, the model to that data, it starts to perform better for that customer. But that same model does not have the generalization power, actually goes down. Now, for another customer, then you need to create a copy of this and do the same and do the same. Maybe not per customer level, but you need to do at a vertical level. So all airline customers have similar nature. All delivery quick commerce companies have similar. All food chains have similar and stuff like that.
True.
In which
Yeah.
case, you end up having 20 odd copies of the software, one for each vertical, and they are not same because the underlying model is not same. The architectures can be same, but the data they are trained on are slightly different. They're specific to that vertical. Now, once this happens, the overall advantage of build once and sell multiple times starts to go away drastically. So we actually ended up saying that the margins could be as low as 40-45%, which is very different from the SaaS play. Do you agree with this, or maybe I would love to also have a deeper discussion with you on this, right? Uh, at least, what are some of your initial thoughts?
Yeah, so I thought initially we were talking about it more from a services perspective. Now I see what you're talking about is even at a model level, right? Which is like, when you're building an ML app. So you're right. And I think, my own guess is right. My own guess is that the general capability, the intelligence problem that people are talking about. See, before Gen AI, and for me, Gen AI is anything which is on top of transformer architecture, right? Not the generative ability technically from a machine learning perspective. So before Gen AI, if you had to solve a problem, you had to start with algorithm, start with model, and then be very, very vertical, right? Without that, you couldn't, right? It is only with transformer architecture, with the scaling laws and things like that, we are saying that look, the general intelligence might be good enough, but then for it to be better than good enough, then you need to do fine tuning, RAG, prompting, things like that, right? And that's where the cost part of it is coming. Now, my general sense is that we have perhaps come to a place where like the intelligence problem at this point in time in 2024 is a melting ice problem. As in, what I feel is that intelligence for, let's say, the vertical of airline versus vertical of quick commerce may be different, and you may need to still do fine tuning, but that is going to be less and less the case as time goes by. Right. Now, there might be specific, like, verticals, let's say, like, some machine training of, let's say, a nuclear power plant, and there is no data about that. So you may need a very, very specific either training or something like that to actually ensure that intelligence works there. But in general, the intelligence problem, if not solved in 2024, will get solved in 25 or 7 and things like that. Right. So that's like a melting ice problem.
Okay.
Not the best place to actually spend time, energy on trying to solve that, right? But you couldn't say the same thing like 3 years ago or 5 years ago, right? You had to actually take a very vertical specific approach, and that I think is the discontinuity that has happened in the last 2 years, of where the general intelligence seems to be good enough for most problems, and then you have to actually keep on getting to a place where it becomes accuracy. Now, does it impact the margins? It used to definitely impact the margins hugely, right, before, and which is where, like, building any AI solution was maybe more expensive than just throwing bodies at it.
Yes.
Which is where, like, most people will, like, sort of say, okay, we'll just give it to an outsourcer and then they will kind of take care of it. Now, my sense is that I was comparing the IT services with SaaS.
Yeah.
From gross margin perspective. Now, the nuance that you are adding is there is IT services, there is SaaS, but then there is SaaS which has underlying machine learning model for different verticals, right? And if you are using different vertical machine learning models, that has impact on its margin structures.
Yes.
My guess is that over a period of time, the intelligence will become so good, so cost effective, that you can assume that intelligence is solved, right? In which case, when you are building businesses, you don't have to either factor in that you need to put in a lot of people or a lot of verticalization, or let me put it another way, a lot of vertical fine tuning. Now, is it like 1 year away, 3 year away? That may be like a question to discuss, but that's why I called it as a melting ice problem. Because some problem, when it becomes a melting ice problem, all you need to do is wait,
Yeah,
right? That's the best solution rather than solving any other way.
absolutely. Coming back to the previous point that you made, right? That in a CFO's office, the people and the software were discussed separately, and how everything has now become an outcome. While I understand this whole point of cost reduction, because that is what matters from a client perspective, right? If I'm a customer, I'm buying a software. The reason I'm buying is I want to bring in efficiency, I want to do things faster, and eventually that should lead to lesser of the cost. But today, the fact that, and this could continue for a year or 3 years until that general intelligence is good enough to solve a large number of problems. Maybe not all, but a large number, right? The outcomes are not 100% correct. Now, this is where you need systems as well as people, both. We have already discussed it. Now, when you're doing this, your costs are actually doubling up. And the reason I call double up is typically people are positioning software, AI software as replacements of humans and then trying to charge what a human would cost in the same market, kind of a thing. So a co-pilot for coding will cost much more if you're trying to replace a high-end person, as opposed to maybe a co-pilot for a call center employee, right? That's a different ballgame. So the costs are actually going to balloon up. And this is where I believe more than the CTOs, it's the visionary CFOs who know that I need to invest today. I need to do early experiments. I know the cost will go up for next maybe 1, 2, 3 years before they actually start to come down, right? That kind of a maturity or that those are the kind of companies that can kind of lead the whole thing, as opposed to a traditional CFO or a CIO or a CXO in general, who has always been, no, I need to keep chipping away at cost. I need to keep chipping because initially you're not going to chip away at the cost. It's going to go up. Do you agree with this? What are your thoughts on this whole thing?
So it's a fascinating question. I'm going to pick very specific keywords that you used, right? And I'm going to sort of see if I can address the question, but might uh, look like it is going on a tangent, right? So enterprises don't buy because of cost saving,
Okay.
right? This is a tenet. I mean, this is going to be this is the tenet 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, now 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. They buy so that they can look smart. It is made by it is people that are involved. They don't want to get fired. They want to look very smart, right? And they want to look very different. And this is something that I work with about 150, 160 startups, right? So many of them sell to enterprise. This is a lesson that keeps coming back at it again and again. Now, cost is a rationalizing factor. Of course, you need to talk about cost, but that comes much later. The keyword that you picked was visionary CFOs, right? So the visionary CFO need to be showing that he is actually doing visionary stuff and he is not left out. Why? I mean, why is the Klarna guy going and making all these tom-tom about saying that, we replace Salesforce? I mean, every guy in that particular thing is saying that, look, we made it happen. We don't know whether it worked or not,
Yeah.
but they have gotten all the attention that they could get, that they have replaced Salesforce, right? And they have gotten it in the wide public eye. Now, most people care about that in their immediate social circle eye. So therefore, there is this saying in the enterprise world that, no enterprise software gets sold if the purchaser is not getting promoted. Right. So the ROI is really the promotion of the person.
Sure.
Right. So my take on this would be that, of course, you need to identify those people who are the visionary. I mean, the visionary in my mind is in the classic uh, Jeffrey Moore case of, right. There are visionary, there are early adopter, and then there are a regular adopter. We are still in the phase of early adopter and visionary phase of that crossing the chasm curve, right? So identifying those people who are generally going to be early adopter, visionary type folks, and then telling them that, look, this is how you adopt, and this is how you can signal to the rest of the world that you are ahead of the rest. And of course, once you have tapped into that emotion, then you are going to go and show to them that, hey, this is the case study you can use. right? To convince others that cost is a big driver. So the reason why they are going to adopt right now is because they classify themselves or they see themselves as those early adopters and visionaries, right? And they are going to do this. Now, in a sufficient long enough time frame, are we talking about huge cost difference? Of course, we are talking about huge cost difference. But why they will pick and do this is for that emotional reason of not getting fired, of looking very smart, either in their vicinity or to their boss or to their industry peers. So every enterprise sale has to tap into an emotion like this. So if you go and look at somebody who's adopting, let's say, Glean or Writer and things like that, what do the CEOs of those companies do? They highlight them and say that this guy is a visionary. This guy's a visionary CEO. So you will see a testimonial, you'll see a video, and they enjoy saying that this is great.
Yeah.
For someone who is very, very risk averse, who does not even want to come on video, would not want to do that. Now, to him, no amount of great case making can actually help them change their mind. Is because, while the logic may make sense, but the fear might come in.
Sure.
Right. So enterprise sales, I mean, and this is not just specifically for AI, and that's why I said, it was true 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is that in enterprise, people care about not looking stupid. I mean, in general, when consumers purchase, we actually are also sort of optimizing for buyer's remorse. We are like, we don't want to feel bad about the purchase that we made later. That's how, the consumer thinking happens.
Yeah.
But the enterprise thinking is, they don't worry about I don't want to sort of feel bad about the purchase, because in enterprise, a budget that was overspent will be forgiven, but a bad mistake will never be forgiven.
That's a great insight. That's a great insight, Rajan. Oh, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this conversation. So I see, Rajan, that you share a lot of these deep insights using simple analogies on your LinkedIn and social media as well, right? Eventually, can we expect a playbook out of all of this?
I do will publish a book on this. For me, let me actually explain my thinking beyond this, right? So I'm generally a very curious person, and when I get curious about a particular subject, I like to go deep into this. What like the Twitter world calls as first principles thinking. And then I'm more excited by, this Richard Feynman quote, or somebody else said this, and if you cannot explain it to a 5-year-old or 11-year-old, you didn't understand it. So in my I would say journey to trying to understand it, I first go to the first principles level and then see if I can simplify it to a level where a child can understand it, right? So that's why I use analogies or metaphors. Metaphors, one simple description I use about metaphor is a rickety sofa in your head on which a complex idea can be seated, right? And then once that is seated, then you can discard it away. So the Indian way of saying this is that, I like to go to a subject which is at the Veda level, the first principles level. Then you translate it into Gita level, which is the mental model that a lot of people, or playbooks that people like to use. And then finally get it to the bhajan level where the mass can understand, right? At the bhajan level, you're just doing bhaja govindam, but nobody understands what is the real meaning behind it. But if you take it to Veda level, only 0.1% people understand. And there are very few people in the world who can actually do it. Some of the most life-changing books for me are books like, Fooled by Randomness, Black Swan, and there are a few more. But then these are ideas that I always felt like, man, if I understood this much earlier in life, it would have made me take far better decisions and do things really different and better, right? So I have this fascination for taking and understanding things at the Veda level and then translating it to the bhajan level, which is why I hang out with smart people, help take their help in understanding things at a first principles level. And whenever you're working with founders are forced to think about things at a first principles level. They may start with a story, but eventually what will work in the real world is the truth, right? And that truth, unless you get to that first principle level, you won't be able to arrive at it. I work with them, I learn from them, and then I see if I can simplify to just check that, if I have understood it correctly. So definitely a book may come out. Some of the favorite authors or thinkers that I like, I already have tried, taken a shot at it. I mentioned about Taleb, pulled by randomness, right? So during COVID time, I created this Twitter thread called Taleb for Kids, which became quite popular. And then not just me, a lot of us are fans of Naval Ravikant's thinking and his way of doing things, decision making, etc. So I wrote a Twitter thread called Naval for Kids, so that also became quite popular. So eventually, a compendium of this, maybe for kids. The for kids is more towards saying if you would know that you understand this when you can explain to a child,
Yeah,
right? So therefore, I write that as a for kids format.
fantastic, fantastic. Uh, Earlier when we started the podcast, right, you talked of as a VC not having a pattern, not having this preconceived world, right? But as a thinking in general, right, whenever you're looking at things, right, it's almost like there's this wall that you have, where you have a lot of bricks already in place, and there are parts which are open, the missing pieces, and then you look at something new and you try and see, hey, where does this go on my wall? There's a very abstract way of trying to kind of summarize how we operate. What you talked of is that not to have any such thing, right? The idea of looking at each of those ideas in isolation from first principles. But how do you do this part of throwing away whatever you've learned so far and adopting something new so quickly? I think all of us do. I think the amount of time that we take is what differentiates one from the other, right? And I've heard this from a couple of people that I've read about, especially in the VC world, that you need to hold your strongest beliefs in the loosest possible manner, right? And what
Yeah, yeah,
you spoke
yeah,
of,
yeah. So a couple of thoughts. Yeah,
that was the first
yeah.
line that came to my mind. So yeah, would love to.
Yeah, yeah. Couple of thoughts on this. On my website, I think there is a tagline. I don't know whether it's still there with the latest template, but the tagline was the first rule of first principle thinking is that you should not use first principles all the time, right? That is the first rule of first principles thinking, right? And that is where mental models come in easy. And Charlie Munger used to talk about this lattice of mental models, and he used to sort of advocate saying you should study wide different range of subjects. You should study biology, you should study physics, you should study mathematics, some sociology, and fiction, and games and things like that, so that you can find out what are the different mental models that are there, so that you can keep that as a lattice of mental models available with you. And then whenever you see that there is a pattern where you can apply this mental model, then you can use it and apply it, right? It's like solving a math problem. What are arithmetic progressions, like geometric progressions, and then there is a problem that comes up, you're like, oh, maybe I can both apply arithmetic progression and geometric progression to solve this particular problem. So it is important for us to actually build a lattice of mental models, and as we grow, as we learn, as we live life, we form these mental models that are available to us to actually solve a particular problem. Now, why I said that for startups, and also especially in 2024, is that many ideas that are coming out now, or many things that have to be made sense of now, those mental models are not turning out to be adequate. One, because of the change that is happening and all the changes that you said, right? I mean, nobody could have imagined this to happen before, but it had happened,
Yeah,
right? So therefore, the frameworks that you're using to sort of think about this using previous model may actually not be useful. That is one, a timing thing. But I would actually argue and say that for startup world, it deals with a lot of uncertainties. See, a math problem is not going to deal with uncertainty. Either it is solved by some human or it is not solved by some human.
yeah,
If it is solved by some human, then it is that you alone are not able to reach that particular solution,
yeah,
right? But the world of startups is not like that. World of startups is always filled with counterintuitiveness. You think that the world is like this, you think the person will behave like this, you think a group of people which we call as market will behave like this. It doesn't. And it is very hard to actually form a theoretical underpinning of that.
Hmm.
You can have a view of the world, and then you have to say, okay, this was the view of the world, now I'm going to update my view of the world.
Hmm.
Right? So in the world of startup, you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. And when you're dealing with uncertainty, you cannot just anchor a very strong mental model and then say, you know what, the world is only this, and I am not going to change. Now, does it mean that every time you are going to actually start with first principles? Maybe not. You have your mental models, and you realize that, you know what, very quickly you do the mental math and say, oh, these things are not going to work this way, so I'm going to change things. Like, why I said what I said at the beginning, right? So since 2011, I've been only on B2B. My first startup was a consumer startup,
Yeah.
right? In 2007, my first startup was a consumer startup. And then I thought, in India, it is very hard to build consumer. It is very hard to build deep tech. So much so I used to say till up to about 2018 that, if you build bleeding edge in India, you will bleed to death. Right? Till some of my friends who were building bleeding edge tech startup were acquired by Reliance. Incidentally, all 4 or 5 of them were acquired by Reliance. But I said, look, bleeding edge tech startup can be built in India. You can actually use computer vision, AI, or some sort of like, new revolutionary mechanical engineering, and you can still build a large enough business in India. Now, in 2024, I thought in 2011 that, B2B is the only viable way to build a sustainable business. And in 2011, again, I was seeing all of this Flipkart and then Capcommerce and all take off, but then sounded very lottery like, sounded, or either it's a hit or a miss,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But in 2024, if you ask this question, how
Hmm.
many B2B companies have gone IPO and how many B2C companies have gone IPO?
Right.
So for me, the answer is different than what I had anticipated in 2011,
Got it. Got it.
right? So I did have a mental model. I did have a framework of thinking about it, but I'm questioning it now. I'm saying, okay, maybe I will evaluate a consumer idea and an enterprise idea from its basics, as opposed to saying, maybe only this pattern works over that pattern.
Got it. Got it. Got it. No, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Uh, how do you, when you're doing all of this, right? I mean, you have kind of answered this, but maybe I'll just double click, right? So one, what you're saying is any mental model is a work in progress at any point of time, right? Two
Yes.
is maybe this idea from AI that just because it's not a perfect model does not mean that it is of no use, right? All models are wrong. We have all studied. We
Some
all
are useful, some are fatal.
right. How do you make sure that you are critiquing them enough that you don't have the blind spots, that you puncture or push as many punches as you can in your own model, right?
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
your way of
That's a
ensuring?
great question. Yeah, great question. I think, this is also part of your previous question, which is, one of the skill that an entrepreneur needs to build, one of the skill that, generally anybody is good. Anybody can be served if they had this skill is to have strong opinions weakly held, right? And I always plug this. And I read this paper when I was graduating out. This is not actually a paper. This is actually a transcript of Richard Hamming's Nobel lecture,
Yeah,
right? You and your research. I'm
yeah,
sure you've come across it. And
yeah,
in that, there is this one sentence that I absolutely love. He says that, scientists, and therefore I say founders or anybody who's dealing with, a lot of uncertain domain, have to have emotional certainty, intellectual uncertainty, right? What it means is that, every day you have to wake up, every day when you wake up, you have to believe that sun goes this way, that the rest of the world, society, scientists have told us. I have to believe that, Newton's law of motion works, the rule of law of gravity works. But then what you need to have is that, some observation, which is very, very objective observation of, is that right? Right? Is that how I am experiencing it? Is that how my faculties are telling me is happening? Now, the thing is that if you are a doubter from the very time you wake up, you can't get anything done. You need to have that emotional certainty. You need to have that absolute conviction. Because if you don't have that conviction, you cannot wake yourself up from the bed to do those things. You cannot convince people around you to sort of work with you to do those things. You will not be able to get your resources, your grant funding, you won't get your VC funding, you won't get your grad students, you won't get your employees to come join you, you won't have the journalists come and speak to you. You have to have the conviction. So every day you have to wake up with conviction. Because if you don't have the conviction, you won't bring the energy. If you don't bring the energy, you cannot generate outcomes.
Yes.
So you have to have that. But then you should not get fooled by it, because if your observation is somewhere telling you that, oh, maybe this is not right, maybe this is not right, maybe this is not right, then you have to actually have that intellectual humility, not get blinded by that emotional conviction to to ignore the observation that you're saying that, look, my mental models have been not right. Only when you stand the shoulders of the giants, you will be able to see further than the horizon.
Yeah.
Right? But you should not see the same thing what the like giant told you to see. You need to say, hey, I am seeing something different. Because if you don't see something different, you don't pay attention to this, then you are going to be blinded. Right? So therefore, that strong opinion weakly held, or how Richard Hamming so beautifully put. Hamming won Nobel Prize, right? I think for creating Hamming vectors. He so beautifully put that a scientist, and I paraphrase him saying a founder, has to have intellectual uncertainty while having emotional certainty. Right? That's a skill that you build. And which is why, if you actually see my post of late, I've been talking a lot about pivots. I say it is far better to pivot 200% than to pivot 20%. Right? You may have come up with an idea which is fantastic. You told a great story. It looked like a great story. A lot of people came around along with you. Fantastic. Right? But you spent maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months, maybe 18 months. In India, you can stretch it to 30 months. But whatever you believed to be working, if it did not work, it is important to ask this question, that maybe it is time for me to update this mental model. Now, a friend of mine said, look, like there are breakthroughs that have happened after 30 years because people stuck onto that. I said, yes, but then the question that you have to ask is, what is the horizon in which you are playing? Now, if you're a scientist, maybe you should reevaluate this question every 10 years or maybe 20 years. But if you're a founder, you have to reevaluate this question every 18 months.
Yes.
Right? Because the horizon of a founder is very different from the horizon of a scientist. Right? In terms of what resources you can pool along, and how long will, the rest of the world will allow you to sort of experiment. Right? So therefore, you have to question this, your mental model, with respect to reality. You should not question it publicly, then you become like a doubter who will not get anything done. But you have to have that intellectual humility to do this. And I made it sound very fancy here, but believe me, all entrepreneurs, all scientists, including, I mean, in a long enough time frame, they intuitively do this. So, and to me, part of the whole entrepreneurial journey or scientific journey is going through that grind. People talk about saying that, look, you go through this valley of death and then you eventually emerge. You don't emerge the same person. You have pivoted thrice.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's a great point, right? When I was reading this article back in my grad days, uh, one of the discussions that I remember was when a scientist discovers that whatever he has thought so far, especially in the world where it's a theoretical studies and not necessarily practical one. So I was part of the algorithmic lab, so our work was always theoretical. When they see everything has been undone, people show two kind of extreme reaction. Either they are very sad, everything is gone now, or they show the positive side that I know at least one way where the solution is not going to come from. And now it's a great time to double up and triple up and keep moving forward, right? This is also what I've seen in the startup world when the pivots happen. There are founders that are very happy that it happened and it happened quickly. That's a great boon because I've been able to avoid a path that I knew would not lead to success now. But then there are founders who are like,
Whatever I had thought, the original pitch, the original idea, everything is gone now, right? So
Well,
it's,
that's the Morpheus paradox,
yes,
right? Yeah, which is
a
yeah.
eagle rediscovering itself, going in this wilderness, breaking the beak against the stone, right? And to grow the new beak. It's an extremely painful process. But the ones who are able to do are a completely different blood altogether. So great point.
Completely. I mean, two posts that I wrote. One is called "Hug Your Surprises." Right? Every time you find a surprise, go hug it. Because like surprise is this rock under which an insight is hidden. Don't have a distaste towards it. Rather, embrace it. The other one is called the Morpheus paradox. Just like if you look at every founder has to be like Morpheus. You need to be absolutely clear that whatever your belief is right. Right. I mean, and then you'll have someone like Neo who's like a doubter, but the guy who eventually lives long life is Morpheus. But by the second movie, you can see that he's totally devastated because all the things that he believed
Yeah,
was not true.
that's
But
it.
then he comes to terms with it, and then he goes to live on. So you have to be like Morpheus completely. Yeah, this is something that I believe in, but then you also have to have some element of that Neo, which is that doubt to say, hey, this is not making sense. So what do I do, and how do I update my mental model?
No, great point, great point. I just want to be cognizant of time. I would love to go this on, right? I'm absolutely enjoying this, but maybe in the interest of time. If you look at today's VC world, Rajan, right? This is all about providing capital and then letting the founder figure out everything else. Barring a couple of discussions, it's a very hands-off approach, especially in India, right? Even in Valley, fairly to a large degree. What I am seeing at least now is the emergence whereby it's more a operator-led thing, saying that capital is only one part that a founder needs. A founder needs lots more, right? Despite having a personality which is an octopus, being able to grow in multiple directions, and all those points that we discussed, right? Do you think in times to come, the operator-led model will kind of become a more dominating as opposed to being purely capital funded model that is there today? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Um, the word operator was coined by execs couldn't become investors so easily, right? And my own take is that look, you have to actually think about this like in different stance, right? So the see, investors are good at finding, spotting opportunities, and then investing money behind that, and then getting like great outcomes of that. Now investors that are investing in startups are completely different beast compared to those who are investing in public market. So the investors of this and that cannot be just compared. Like it's like comparing IPL and maybe and test cricket, right? So completely different game. But on the other hand, operators, right, are people who are not investors, who know how to actually build a business, scale the business. They understand the emotional challenges, they understand the operational challenges, they know how big companies work, they know how to take a small company, turn into a big company. All of that is there. But then, just because you are a good operator doesn't make you like a good owner of a team, right? Just because you are a good player, you don't become like a good owner of a team or a good coach of a team. And this is where I feel people conflate it, right? I don't think a good operator is necessarily a great investor.
Yes.
And also I don't think a good player is a great coach.
Yeah.
If you want to be like a great player, you cannot get coaching from Tiger Woods. You have to get coaching from Tiger Woods' father. Tiger Woods' father knows what time to wake up, what to feed, what not to feed, what distraction to keep stop.
Yeah.
Right. So again, great player does not necessarily become a great coach as well. Now, if you were to call a VC as a coach plus an owner of a team, I don't think just because you were good at this immediately translates to that. And the other thing that I would say that people conflate with this is that in operator, people can only help with the psychology of the game, not the game itself. So somebody who was gold medal winner of hockey cannot teach you pickleball.
Yeah.
He can teach you things like how to have a grit and how to actually train better and things like that, but he wouldn't know how to exactly do a left serve or a right serve better than like, anybody else that can teach. So I personally don't believe that, operator-led investors, operator background investors are going to become great investors. Great investors in my mind, and I have had the fortune of going and meeting people, is great investors are great thinkers.
Sure.
They are able to now I'm talking about general investors.
Wow.
The early stage, the VC type of investors, they are good at understanding people. The late stage investors are great thinkers who can understand more than people. They can understand trend, they can understand changes, and then they can make decisions. In fact, the greatest of the investors are those that can actually understand themselves and understand their own emotion. They don't get fear, they don't get greed, they don't do they don't give into FOMO, they don't get very greedy, and they know how to actually deal with envy. So a great investor is someone who is able to deal with their emotion, can understand trend, and can read people, and are good thinkers. So some of the most smartest guys that I've had the opportunity to sort of meet in life is that they have been investors, and they will come across as saying that they will say that I don't know anything, right? And they will like when you whatever you take to them a problem of, okay, I'm having a issue with my co-founder or my friend, or like, this is not happening, they'll break it down and then help you think through that. But because they also had the capital, so they'll also invest the capital with you. So the question that I'm trying to ask is that I don't think an operator-led investor has become a better investor. I also don't think a guy who focuses more on finance has become a better investor. But best investors are good decision makers, are because they are good thinkers. Best investors understand people, and they can understand trend, and they can actually regulate their own emotions
Hmm.
of fear, envy, greed better than others. Where operators come in handy is they can treat you, they can help you with the psychology of the game, not the tactics of the game. That is where the extra advantage of an operator comes.
Interesting.
They can actually tell you how to not make mistakes on the psychology of building the of playing the game of entrepreneurship.
Interesting. Interesting. Cool. Last question. The most memorable pitch or the most memorable founder, and why so far?
I mean, this comes out of very recent memory, and I don't know whether this podcast will reach him or not, but I was at the Indeed's office, and they had organized a small session where, like, 4 or 5 founders came and pitched, and I have told this pitch to so many people that this is very memorable for me this year. So there's this founder of I'll reveal the name of the company later. Founder who walks in, he has like a headband. He comes and pitches, and he opens his slides and he says, look, he says, here is a graph of getting to 1 million ARR in 8 months, right? And the panelists that were there, the VC and the CEO of Indeed was also sitting there. And he goes, like, you all need to fund me.
Okay.
If you don't fund me, you will lose your job.
Okay.
When you lose your job, I will find you job. There was this pitch. To me, it felt like I'm sitting inside an episode of Silicon Valley, the show. It was so surreal, right? So I don't know if you've seen that show. There is this Chinese guy who lives in the house, and he has an accent, and he's very funny, right? And he makes very quirky statements. So to me, it felt like a person like that is pitching. Hey, like, I got 1 million ARR in 8 months. You must fund me. If you don't fund me, you will lose a job, and I will help you find a job. So the company that he runs it uses AI, and then it has a small app on top of the Zoom calls that are happening, and it tells candidates on how to answer a question. Now, you might argue whether it is ethical, unethical, whether it is good or bad, but that particular startup has done so many quirky pitches and videos like this that they have gone viral on Twitter. Sorry, or viral on TikTok, right? So everybody kind of knows them, and because everybody knows them, they have piled on, and everybody has checked out the tool, and this tool seems to be interesting, so therefore people are checking it out. And I spoke to the CEO of Indeed. He was like, look, I have always seen that when you build tools for the employers, it works better than building tools for the employees, which means it makes more business sense. So I'm not sure about it, but the pitch is interesting.
Fantastic. Interesting.
Right. So the name of the company is Final Round AI, and including now the pitch was so good that I have become a huge proponent of this particular guy and the way he built this pitch and the way he actually delivered this pitch, because I felt so surreal listening to that particular pitch. Right now, I'm sure this is a pitch, but he's come and delivered his content in other places also in such a compelling way, which is what has led him to be so popular on TikTok as well. Now we will see whether this is viable or not, whether he'll have to deal with lawsuits or not. But since you asked the question about what is the most memorable pitch, this is the most memorable pitch I heard the entire year.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Rajan. I would have loved to go on and on, but time has its own limits. Thank you so much for walking us through so many deep insights. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure the world will benefit a lot and will continue to benefit. I will personally look forward to the playbooks that you're writing, and thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, it was fun conversation, Anuj. I also had a fantastic time, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
All right.